The morning sun painted golden streaks across the emergency room windows as Dr. Sarah Chen finished her third consecutive 12-hour shift. Her scrubs hung loose on her tired frame, and dark circles shadowed her eyes, but she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had saved countless lives. The hospital corridors buzzed with their usual chaos, nurses rushing between rooms, monitors beeping steadily, and the distant sound of sirens growing closer. Sarah had always been driven. Even as a child, she possessed an intensity that set her apart from her peers. While other kids played video games, she studied anatomy books borrowed from the library. While teenagers worried about prom dates, she volunteered at local clinics. Her parents, both immigrants who had sacrificed everything for their daughter's education, watched with pride and concern as Sarah pushed herself beyond normal limits. Medical school had been brutal, but Sarah thrived under pressure. She graduated top of her class, completed her residency in record time, and specialized in emergency medicine because she craved the adrenaline of life or death situations. Her colleagues respected her skills but worried about her relentless pace. Sarah rarely took breaks, often worked double shifts, and seemed to carry the weight of every patient's outcome on her shoulders. The emergency department where Sarah worked served one of the city's most challenging neighborhoods. Gang violence, drug overdoses, domestic abuse cases, and industrial accidents filled the trauma bays daily. The staff turnover was high, but Sarah remained, becoming a pillar of strength for newer doctors and nurses who looked to her for guidance during their most difficult moments. On this particular morning, Sarah's beeper buzzed insistently. Multiple ambulances were en route with casualties from a construction site collapse. A crane had malfunctioned during the early shift change, bringing down scaffolding and trapping several workers beneath twisted metal and concrete debris. The first responders reported at least 15 injured, with varying degrees of trauma. Sarah's exhaustion vanished as her training kicked in. She barked orders to prepare trauma bays, called in additional surgeons, and coordinated with the blood bank to ensure adequate supplies. The emergency department transformed into a well-oiled machine, with every staff member knowing their role in the approaching storm. The first ambulance screeched to a halt outside the emergency entrance. Paramedics rushed through the automatic doors, wheeling in a middle-aged construction worker whose hard hat had saved his life, but whose legs were crushed beneath a fallen beam. Blood stained his fluorescent safety vest, and his face was pale from shock and blood loss. Sarah's hands moved swiftly, checking vitals, ordering x-rays, and coordinating with orthopedic surgeons. The man's wife arrived minutes later, her work uniform still dusty from her own morning shift. She clutched Sarah's arm with desperate strength, begging for information about her husband's condition. Sarah's voice remained steady and reassuring as she explained the situation and the treatment plan. The second ambulance brought in 2 more workers, one with severe head trauma and another with internal injuries. The emergency department filled with the sounds of medical equipment, urgent conversations, and the quiet sobs of worried family members gathering in the waiting area. Sarah moved between patients like a conductor orchestrating a complex symphony, her focus absolute despite the mounting pressure. As the morning progressed, more casualties arrived. A young apprentice, barely 20 years old, had been working his first week on the construction crew. He was unconscious when the paramedics brought him in, his breathing shallow and irregular. Sarah immediately recognized the signs of severe internal bleeding and potential spinal injury. The young man's girlfriend arrived at the hospital, still in her college sweatshirt and carrying textbooks. She had been studying for finals when she received the terrifying phone call. Her hands shook as she tried to fill out paperwork, and tears streamed down her face as she waited for news. Sarah made a mental note to check on her regularly. She had learned that treating families was often as important as treating patients. Hour after hour, Sarah worked without pause. She sutured wounds, stabilized fractures, ordered emergency surgeries, and made split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. Her team moved in perfect synchronization, each member trusting Sarah's judgment completely. Even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she pushed forward, driven by an internal fire that refused to be extinguished. The construction site accident had brought chaos to the hospital, but it had also revealed something beautiful about human nature. Other patients in the emergency department, despite their own pain and discomfort, offered comfort to the families of the injured workers. Volunteers appeared from throughout the hospital to help with translation services, childcare for worried siblings, and emotional support for overwhelmed relatives. Sarah noticed these small acts of kindness even as she focused on medical procedures. They reminded her why she had chosen this profession, not just to heal bodies, but to witness the incredible resilience and compassion of the human spirit. Every success in the trauma bay felt like a victory not just for her medical team, but for everyone who had contributed to saving lives. As afternoon approached, the immediate crisis began to stabilize. Most of the injured workers were either in surgery or recovering in hospital beds. The emergency department slowly returned to its normal rhythm, though the emotional weight of the morning lingered in the air. Sarah finally allowed herself a moment to sit down, her legs shaking from 12 hours of constant movement. The young apprentice remained her greatest concern. Despite their best efforts, his condition was deteriorating. The internal bleeding was more severe than initially anticipated, and his body was showing signs of multiple organ failure. Sarah consulted with the trauma surgeon, and they agreed that emergency surgery was the only option. Though the risks were significant, Sarah found herself thinking about the young man's girlfriend, still sitting in the waiting room with her untouched textbooks. She was about the same age Sarah had been when she first decided to become a doctor. The girl's fear and helplessness reminded Sarah of her own younger self, sitting beside her grandmother's hospital bed years ago, feeling powerless as the woman who had raised her slowly slipped away. That experience had shaped Sarah's entire career. She had promised herself that she would never let another family feel as helpless as she had felt that day. Every patient became a chance to fulfill that promise, to fight against the darkness that threatened to take loved ones away from those who needed them most. The hospital's intercom crackled with an announcement calling all available staff to assist with a new emergency. A multi-car accident on the nearby highway was sending additional casualties their way. Sarah took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to face whatever came next. The warrior in her was far from finished fighting. The highway accident brought a different kind of chaos to the already strained emergency department. Unlike the construction workers who had been injured while performing their daily jobs, these casualties included entire families returning from weekend trips, college students heading back to campus, and elderly couples on their way to visit grandchildren. Sarah's energy reserves were running dangerously low, but she refused to show weakness in front of her team. The newest residents looked to her for guidance, and the nursing staff depended on her steady presence to maintain order amid the growing crisis. She grabbed another cup of strong coffee and reviewed the incoming patient reports, her mind automatically prioritizing cases based on severity and available resources. The first family to arrive broke Sarah's heart. A mother, father, and 2 young children had been traveling in their minivan when a drunk driver ran a red light, slamming into their vehicle at high speed. The parents were conscious but badly injured, while their 8-year-old daughter had suffered severe head trauma. Their 5-year-old son sat in the waiting area with a child life specialist, his stuffed animal clutched tightly in his small hands, asking repeatedly when his sister would wake up. Sarah personally took charge of the little girl's case. The child's blonde curls were matted with blood, and her tiny body looked impossibly fragile on the adult-sized gurney. Every medical instinct told Sarah that time was running out. The girl needed immediate neurosurgery, but the hospital's neurosurgical team was already operating on 2 other critical cases from the earlier construction accident. The attending neurosurgeon, Dr. Martinez, appeared beside Sarah's shoulder. His scrubs were stained with evidence of the long surgery he had just completed. "We can try to stabilize her and transfer to the children's hospital downtown," he suggested, though both doctors knew that transport would take precious time they might not have. Sarah studied the girl's pupils, checked her reflexes, and reviewed the CT scan results. Her years of experience told her that waiting was not an option. "She needs surgery now," she said firmly. "Every minute we delay increases the risk of permanent brain damage or death." Dr. Martinez nodded grimly. "I'll prep for emergency surgery. Can you handle the family?" Talking to parents about their child's life-threatening injuries was the part of Sarah's job that never got easier. She had delivered similar news hundreds of times, but each conversation felt like the first. She found the girl's parents in a trauma bay being treated for their own injuries, broken ribs, lacerations, and severe bruising, but their physical pain was nothing compared to their anguish about their daughter. The mother, despite her injuries, tried to get up from the hospital bed when Sarah approached. "Please tell me she's going to be okay," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Tell me my baby is going to be okay." Sarah pulled up a chair and spoke honestly about the severity of the situation, the risks of surgery, and the potential outcomes. She held the mother's hand as tears flowed freely, and she answered every question with compassion and clarity. The father, his arm in a sling, stood by the window staring out at nothing, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. While the little girl was being prepared for surgery, Sarah continued treating the steady stream of accident victims. A teenager with a collapsed lung, an elderly man with multiple fractures, a pregnant woman who had been thrown from her vehicle. Each case demanded her complete attention and expertise. The emergency department had become a battlefield, and Sarah was fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. The young construction worker from the morning was also heading into his second surgery. His condition had worsened despite their initial interventions, and the trauma team was making a last-ditch effort to save his life. His girlfriend had been joined by his parents and siblings, creating a small vigil in the hospital waiting room. Sarah noticed the girl sitting alone for a moment while the family discussed something privately. She approached quietly and sat down beside her. "How are you holding up?" Sarah asked gently. The girl looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "I keep thinking this is all a nightmare and I'll wake up soon. We were supposed to go to dinner tonight to celebrate him getting the construction job. It was his first real job after graduation." Sarah remembered being that young, believing that terrible things happened to other people, that love could conquer any obstacle, and that the future stretched endlessly ahead, full of possibilities. The reality of how quickly everything could change was a harsh lesson that came to everyone eventually, but some learned it far too early. "He's getting the best possible care," Sarah assured her. "The surgical team is excellent and he's young and strong. Those are advantages in his favor." Throughout the evening, Sarah moved between crisis points like a general commanding troops in battle. She made rapid decisions, delegated responsibilities, and maintained communication between various medical teams. Her phone buzzed constantly with updates from surgery, laboratory results, and requests for consultation. The little girl's surgery lasted 3 hours. Martinez finally emerged from the operating room, his face showing the strain of the delicate procedure. Sarah met him in the hallway, reading his expression before he spoke a word. The surgery had been successful in relieving the pressure on the child's brain, but the next 24 hours would be critical in determining the extent of any permanent damage. Sarah delivered the news to the parents, who clung to each other as they processed the information. The mother asked if she could see her daughter, despite her own injuries making movement painful. Sarah personally escorted them to the pediatric intensive care unit, where their little girl lay surrounded by monitors and medical equipment, her small chest rising and falling with the assistance of a ventilator. The sight of their daughter connected to machines was almost too much for the parents to bear. The mother reached out tentatively to touch her child's hand, afraid that even the slightest contact might cause harm. Sarah explained each piece of equipment, what the monitors were measuring, and what the medical team would be watching for in the coming hours. "Can she hear us?" the father asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We believe that unconscious patients can often hear familiar voices," Sarah replied. Talking to her, reading stories, playing her favorite music, all of these things might help. As midnight approached, Sarah realized she had been working for nearly 18 hours straight. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote notes in patient charts, and she had to concentrate harder than usual to maintain her clinical focus. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the crisis was beginning to fade, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion. The young construction worker's second surgery had not gone as hoped. Despite the surgical team's best efforts, his body was shutting down. Sarah found herself in the heartbreaking position of preparing his family for the worst possible outcome. The girlfriend sat in stunned silence as Sarah explained that they had done everything medically possible. "But he's so young," his mother protested. "People recover from these injuries all the time. I've read about it online." Sarah had learned to be honest while still providing hope when appropriate. But she also knew the importance of helping families prepare for realistic outcomes. She spent time with each family member, answering questions and providing emotional support during their darkest moments. The emergency department finally began to quiet down as the last of the accident victims were either admitted to the hospital or treated and released. Sarah's team started the process of restocking supplies, updating patient charts, and preparing for the next shift. The janitors moved through the trauma bays, mopping away the evidence of the day's battles. Sarah found herself standing in the hospital's chapel, a small interfaith space where families often came to pray during medical crises. She was not particularly religious, but something about the quiet sanctuary provided a moment of peace after the chaos. Candles flickered on a simple altar, and soft lighting created an atmosphere of calm reflection. She thought about all the lives that had intersected in the emergency department that day. The construction workers who had simply been doing their jobs, the families traveling on what should have been ordinary car trips, the medical staff who had chosen to dedicate their careers to healing others. Each person had brought their own story, hopes and fears into the hospital, and each had been forever changed by the events of this single day. The chapel door opened quietly, and the little girl's mother entered. Her injuries had been treated, but she moved carefully, each step a reminder of the day's trauma. She nodded to Sarah and took a seat in one of the simple wooden pews, her hands folded in silent prayer. Sarah remained in the chapel for a few more minutes, gathering strength for what she knew would be a long night ahead. The little girl was stable but critical. The young construction worker was fighting for his life, and several other patients required ongoing monitoring throughout the night. The warrior in Sarah was tired, but she was far from ready to surrender the fight. The hours between midnight and dawn were always the most challenging in any hospital. The normal rhythm of daily life stopped, leaving only the essential business of healing and the quiet vigils of worried families. Sarah had changed into fresh scrubs, but her exhaustion ran deeper than clean clothes could address. Still, she refused to leave while critical patients remained under her care. The young construction worker's condition had stabilized somewhat after his second surgery, but his prognosis remained uncertain. His girlfriend had finally fallen asleep in the waiting room chair, her head resting on a jacket provided by one of the nurses. His mother sat beside the bed, holding his hand and speaking softly about memories from his childhood, his first day of school, family vacations, the pride she had felt when he graduated from college. Sarah checked on him every hour, reviewing his vital signs and consulting with the intensive care team about his treatment plan. Each small improvement in his condition felt like a victory, while every setback sent waves of anxiety through the medical staff who had grown emotionally invested in his recovery.
The little girl from the car accident was showing encouraging signs.
Her intracranial pressure had stabilized, and she was beginning to respond to stimulation. When her father spoke her name, her eyelids fluttered slightly, causing both parents to lean forward with desperate hope. The pediatric neurologist was cautiously optimistic, though he warned that brain injuries in children could have delayed effects that might not become apparent for weeks or months. Sarah found the girl's 5-year-old brother sleeping in a makeshift bed of chairs in the family waiting area. His grandparents had arrived from out of state and were taking turns staying with him while his parents maintained their bedside vigil. The boy had asked innocently why everyone was crying, and when his sister would be ready to play again. His grandmother had explained as gently as possible that his sister was very sick and needed to rest in the hospital for a while. As the night progressed, Sarah made rounds through the intensive care units, checking on all the patients from the day's emergencies. Each room told a story of human resilience and the complex emotions that surrounded medical crises. Families had reorganized their entire lives around hospital visiting hours, transforming waiting rooms into temporary homes complete with pillows, snacks, and photo albums meant to encourage unconscious loved ones. The drunk driver who had caused the multi-car accident was also in the hospital, though under police guard. He had suffered relatively minor injuries compared to his victims, a cruel irony that was not lost on the medical staff or the affected families. Sarah treated him with the same professional care she provided to all patients, but she struggled internally with the knowledge that his choices had caused so much suffering. The man was awake and appeared to understand the gravity of what had happened. He had asked several times about the other people involved in the accident, particularly the children. The police officers assigned to his case maintained a professional but noticeably cold demeanor, having seen too many similar situations throughout their careers. Sarah's own moral struggles with treating someone who had caused harm to others reflected broader ethical questions that all medical professionals faced. She had sworn an oath to heal without judgment, to provide care based on medical need rather than personal worthiness. Yet she was also human, and the sight of the little girl's family's suffering made it difficult to maintain complete emotional detachment. Dr. Martinez found Sarah in the hospital cafeteria during the early morning hours. The normally busy space was nearly empty except for a few overnight staff grabbing coffee and quick meals. Sarah sat alone at a corner table, staring at an untouched sandwich while reviewing patient files on her tablet. "You need to go home," he said, sitting down across from her. "You've been here for almost 20 hours straight. That's not sustainable, and it's not safe for your patients." Sarah looked up from her tablet, her eyes showing the strain of the extended shift. "The construction worker is still critical, and I want to be here when the little girl wakes up. Her parents are counting on me." "The night shift is excellent," Dr. Martinez replied, "and you'll be useless to everyone if you collapse from exhaustion. We've all seen what happens to doctors who push too hard for too long." Patient care suffers when medical staff are impaired by fatigue. Sarah knew he was right, but leaving felt like abandoning her responsibilities. She had developed personal connections with the families affected by the day's tragedies, and their trust in her felt like a sacred obligation. The thought of going home to her empty apartment while they continued their vigil seemed almost selfish. 20 more minutes, she negotiated. I want to check on everyone one more time, and then I'll go home for a few hours. Martinez smiled knowingly. I've heard that before. Promise me you'll actually leave, not just say you will. Sarah made her final rounds through the intensive care units. The construction worker's vital signs had improved slightly, and his girlfriend was now awake and holding his hand. She looked up hopefully when Sarah entered the room, searching for any sign of positive news in the doctor's expression. His body is responding well to the treatments, Sarah reported. His kidneys are starting to function normally again, and his blood pressure has stabilized. These are good signs, though he's still critical. The girlfriend nodded, processing this information carefully. When will we know if he's going to be okay? Sarah had learned to be honest about uncertainty while still providing appropriate hope. Brain injuries and internal trauma can take time to fully resolve. We're monitoring everything closely, and each day that passes without complications improves his chances. Your being here, talking to him, might be helping more than you realize. In the pediatric intensive care unit, the little girl was showing more signs of awareness. Her eyes opened briefly when her mother spoke, and she seemed to track movement around her bed. The neurologist had been by earlier and was encouraged by her progress, though he continued to emphasize that recovery from brain injuries was unpredictable and often slow. Sarah spent a few minutes with the girl's parents, explaining the positive developments while managing their expectations about the long road ahead. The mother had barely left her daughter's bedside, and the father was coordinating with their insurance company and his employer to arrange extended time off from work. She moved her fingers when I was reading to her, the mother reported excitedly. It was just a little bit, but I'm sure it was intentional. She always loved that particular story. Sarah examined the little girl carefully, noting the subtle improvements in her neurological responses. Children often recovered from brain injuries better than adults, but the extent of any lasting effects would not be known for weeks or months. The family would need ongoing support as they navigated this uncertain journey. The drunk driver had been moved to a regular hospital room under continued police supervision. Sarah checked his medical chart more out of professional obligation than personal interest. His blood alcohol level at the time of the accident had been nearly 3 times the legal limit, and this was apparently not his first drunk driving offense. The legal consequences he would face paled in comparison to the emotional burden of knowing he had nearly killed a child and seriously injured multiple innocent people. Sarah finally gathered her personal belongings and prepared to leave the hospital. The early morning sunlight was beginning to filter through the windows, painting everything in soft golden hues that seemed inappropriate given the gravity of the night's events. The parking garage was nearly empty, and her car felt foreign after so many hours in the controlled environment of the hospital. During the drive home, Sarah's mind continued to process the events of the past day. She thought about the construction workers who had simply been doing their jobs when disaster struck, the families whose routine car trip had become a nightmare, and the young people whose lives had been forever altered by circumstances beyond their control. Her apartment felt unnaturally quiet after the constant noise and activity of the hospital. Sarah stood in her shower, letting hot water wash away the physical and emotional residue of the extended shift. She tried to clear her mind, but images from the emergency department continued to replay: the construction worker's girlfriend clutching her textbooks, the little girl's mother reaching out to touch her daughter's hand, the 5-year-old boy asking when his sister would wake up. Sarah fell into bed as the sun rose fully over the city, her phone set to ring in 4 hours for any emergency calls from the hospital. She knew that when she returned for her next shift, some of her patients would have improved, while others might have taken turns for the worse. The uncertainty was part of what made emergency medicine both challenging and rewarding. As she drifted towards sleep, Sarah reflected on why she continued to push herself so hard, why she fought so fiercely for every patient, and why she refused to accept defeat even when the odds seemed impossible. The answer lay in her fundamental belief that every life had value, that every family deserved to have someone fighting for their loved one, and that the difference between giving up and pushing harder could mean the difference between devastating loss and miraculous recovery. The warrior and Dr. Sarah Chan would rest for a few hours, but she would return to the battlefield soon, ready to fight again for those who needed her most. In the ongoing war between life and death, between hope and despair, between healing and suffering. She had chosen her side long ago. She would continue to demand that her patients push harder, fight longer, and never surrender, because she would never stop pushing harder herself. The little girl would wake up 3 days later, calling for her mother in a voice that brought tears of joy to everyone who had fought so hard to save her. The young construction worker would recover after 2 more surgeries and months of rehabilitation, eventually returning to work with a renewed appreciation for life's precious fragility. Sarah Chen would be there for all of it, the warrior who had refused to let darkness claim those under her care.